so between the DRC and Rwanda in the framework of the Luanda process. They need the full support of the international community, and here I would like to applaud the upcoming ministerial meeting of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union at the initiative of Angola to discuss the situation in the East. These regional efforts must be conducted in conjunction with the mediation efforts at the provincial and local level, aimed at facilitating the disarmament of armed groups in the spirit of the Nairobi process. As part of the implementation of its mandate, MONUSCO has continued to support the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration efforts of the government, in particular in Ituri and in certain provinces of North Kivu, as well as the efforts linked to the reform of the security sector. In Lubero, in North Kivu, a reintegration project benefited over 1,800 former combatants. As part of the reform of the security sector, MONUSCO supported the establishment of a national unit in charge of coordinating the reform of the security sector under the auspices of the Special Advisor of the President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, on the 25th of June, Prime Minister Judith Suminwa Tuluka and myself chaired the closing ceremony of the operations of MONUSCO in South Kivu, putting an end to 20 years of operations in the province. As you were able to read in the joint report submitted to your council, the disengagement in South Kivu took place within the established time frame thanks to close cooperation between the Congolese authorities and the mission by courageously tackling the security and logistical challenges jointly identified. I thank the Congolese authorities for their flexibility and pragmatism throughout this process. The joint evaluation report on the disengagement has made it possible for us to draw important lessons from this process, which will be very useful to the joint planning of its next phases. In parallel, the process of transition is continuing. A roadmap, that is a provincial transition plan for the province of South Kivu, together with a support plan of the UN country team, have been finalized. These plans identify priorities, available resources, and future needs. I encourage member states to fully support this transition, including financially, so that it goes smoothly. I would also like to underscore the important role played by the Peace Building Fund in the framework of this transition. In the context of the disengagement and transition, the acceleration of PDDRCS will require decisive determination on the part of the authorities to convince the armed groups of the need for disarmament, starting with the provinces of Tanganyika, South Kivu, Maniema, and Ituri, and until the end of the conflict in North Kivu, as well as a long-term commitment by the international partners of the DRC. The UN system, for its part, will continue to work closely with the authorities to ensure a technical and operational support for the PDDRCS. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, to conclude, I would like to share with you an extract of a poem written by the young people of Uhuru Knowledge Center, and which expresses very sadly the perils of being young in North Kivu and bears witness to the urgency of both national and international support. To live in inhumane conditions, walking endless kilometers, on a quest for peace, but at each halt it's war that reigns supreme. An infernal cycle of fleeing and bombs falling on the IDPs of Mugunga after this constant fleeing. Trauma and fear have become our daily companions. Villages burned, houses set on fire, the hearts of entire families shattered in Kishishe, in Bomba, in Kichanga, in Rubaya, in Kurochi, and Mugunga. Anger is boiling over. The more time passes, the more the impasse and the rhythm of violence settles in, while we would actually prefer to dance to the beat of justice, peace, and reconciliation. Those millions of children must return to their villages as they thirst to return to their classrooms. Xenopes of the future, may these children be saved. We have a duty to listen to this Congolese youth and to support it wholeheartedly for the future of the country. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements, and I give the floor to the representative of France. Mr. President, I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing, and I reiterate to her the full support of France. I would like to emphasize several points. France is gravely concerned by the current escalation in the east of the DRC. This violence is fueling the crisis and violations of international law. France condemns the bombing of the Mongonga IDP camp on May 3rd and demands that the full truth be established regarding this incident. We also condemn the attacks which led to the death of humanitarian personnel on July 1st. France welcomes the July 4th announcement of a 2-week truce between the warring parties. This should pave the way for a resumption of dialogue with a view to a settlement within the framework of the Luanda process. All parties must act to this end. We support the efforts of the President of Angola. This truth must also allow for comprehensive humanitarian access. We condemn the actions of all armed groups in the east of the DRC, including the M23, which has continued its offensive since the beginning of the year and extended its control towards the north of North Kivu province. France denounces the pressure exerted by the M23 on MONUSCO in order to take control of certain areas. The 2024 report of the panel of experts highlighted the ties maintained by several armed groups with state actors. France condemns the violation of DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Rwanda's military support for the M23, and the increasing presence of Rwandan military forces on Congolese territory. These actions must stop. The DRC, for its part, must put an end to the ties its armed forces maintain with the FDLR, and we welcome its commitment to demobilize this group's combatants. France welcomes the deployment of SAMI DRC. We have taken note of the Secretary General's recommendation for strengthening cooperation between MONUSCO and this regional force. A draft text will be presented to Security Council members shortly to this end by my delegation. France also asks that regional forces strengthen their coordination with MONUSCO. We welcome the work of the panel of experts established pursuant to Resolution 1533, as well as the renewal of the sanctions regime. We recall that the arms embargo in the DRC only applies to the armed groups and that it no longer applies to DRC authorities or regional partner forces. MONUSCO continues to play a key role. The joint report by the UN and the Congolese authorities is clear on the challenges encountered during the drawdown from South Kivu. The conditions that made this drawdown possible are not yet in place in North Kivu or Ituri. France welcomes the Congolese government's determination to consolidate the transfer of responsibility in South Kivu before moving on to the next stages. We have full confidence that the government of the DRC will continue its cooperation with the United Nations. I thank you. I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of MONUSCO, Madam Bintou Keita, for her briefing. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda at this session, and would like to make a respectful appeal to make, in good faith, all efforts necessary to channel all efforts towards a constructive dialogue. The appointment of Madam Judith Suminwa Tuluka as the first female prime minister in the history of the DRC is a milestone that should be underscored because it promotes the participation of women in decision-making positions. In addition to her, there's 17 other women in the government, which should continue to be strengthened because the representation of women in decision-making positions is a key aspect in more inclusive, safe, and peaceful societies, and a institutional and democratic proof of combat against violence against women and other vulnerable groups. And Mr. President, we're very concerned about violence of M23 in North Kivu and its expansion to parts of South Kivu that coincides with the withdrawal of MONUSCO. This situation confirms the need for cooperation between the DRC and MONUSCO in implementing the plan of withdrawal of the mission as an element of support to governmental control over all its territory. Regarding the deterioration of the security situation, it's important to recall the clear message of the Security Council issued last month regarding foreign support for M23 and foreign support for certain armed groups such as FDLR. Such support should cease immediately. Ecuador acknowledges the diplomatic efforts of mediation between the DRC and Rwanda, led by the government of Angola. It's possible that the signature of an agreement of cessation of hostilities between the government and various armed groups in the province of Turi. This has become a possibility, which is why Ecuador encourages the government to continue tackling the causes of intercommunal tensions and to implement the agreement in the framework of the disarmament, demobilization, and community recovery and stabilization program. The atrocities and crimes recorded in the DRC, including gender-based sexual violence and serious violations against children, cannot remain unpunished. In this context, I'd like to highlight the work of MONUSCO and its commitment to ensure the end of recruitment and the use of children in armed groups, and its work in strengthening the judiciary through the implementation of the joint program of support for judicial reform of the United Nations and the technical and financial support to combat against impunity and crimes against humanity. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in the DRC continues to be critical, with over 7 million IDPs and approximately 400,000 people who returned to the country in 2023, which converts this crisis in one of the largest around the world, which forces the international community to respond significantly to meet these urgent needs. In this context, we'd like to welcome the humanitarian truce that was agreed in the east of the DRC thanks to the good offices and the support of the United States and Rwanda. We call on the parties to respect this truce. Ecuador considers the deployment of the SADC mission with the support of the African Union is essential as a demonstration of regional support for peace and stabilization of the DRC, on which the Security Council must support, as well as it should support all regional, bilateral, and international initiatives that, in a coordinated fashion, supports the DRC in consolidating peace and political stability. Lastly, we'd like to reiterate that only dialogue and peaceful means will achieve sustainable peace. This is why the Nairobi and Luanda processes must continue, as they have become key elements in the peace architecture of the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. We welcome the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda to the Chamber. And I'd like to start by thanking the Special Representative